crashes, defective products, dangerous drugs, injuries, and abuse. Across the state of Alabama, the attorneys, proudly sponsored by the law firm of Hollis, Wright, are here to serve you. Your tough legal questions answered by our experts with host David Lamb and the attorneys of Hollis, Wright.
Good evening and welcome into the attorneys. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. An interesting topic of conversation, a great panel of guests, but first, the ground rules of how the show is going to work. All right, for the next half hour, we're going to get together, talk about a topic that we hope, our intention anyway, is to discuss something that matters to you. But the show's always better if you're involved. So the ways you can do that, pretty simple. You'll see that at the bottom of your screen. And also the number to know at all times. You should write this down. All right, the number anytime you need Hollis Wright, 844-LAW-TALK, 844-LAW-TALK. That is 844-529-8255, or locally here in the Birmingham area, 205-324-3600. And don't forget, during each and every airing of the attorneys, we have lawyers from Hollis Wright standing by live to speak with you. That is a free, off-air and confidential conversation, a great opportunity that is yours for the taking. Now, leading the conversation in tonight's show, Carter Clay from Hollis Wright. Good to see you, my friend.
Good to see you, David. I hope you're doing well.
Doing well, thank you.
Yeah, interesting topic tonight. It's one that we've covered before, and it is such an important topic because it touches so many people and so many lives that are out there. We're going to be handling family law issues, family law matters such as divorce, child custody, alimony, and those types of subjects here this evening. Unfortunately, there are a lot of families out there that are struggling in their marital relationship. They're weighing the pros and cons of getting a divorce, maybe their kids involved, and they're really trying to just make the best decision perhaps for their kids, but also for their relationship with their spouse. And unfortunately, in society, we have a high percentage of marriages that end in divorce. And that ultimately will perhaps lead one spouse or another to retain an attorney. And so what we're going to be covering here this evening is just kind of rights and responsibilities of the spouses within the context of maybe a legal separation or a divorce, kind of what to do, what not to do, when should you or should not, you don't have to go hire an attorney, contested versus uncontested divorce. Right. And I'm very happy to have Nicole Saia here with us this evening. Nicole works, as I understand it, for the Crittenden law firm.
Yes.
And Judy Crittenden is somebody that I have been familiar with and have known for many years. I've been practicing law for about 20 years, and I know that she has a reputation for being one of the toughest and most aggressive, most well-respected divorce attorneys in our area. So I know that you're proud and privileged to be working with her and perhaps have her as a mentor for you in your legal practice as you develop.
Yes, it's exciting. Judy's been practicing law for 50 years, so she's a wealth of knowledge that she brings to our firm.
Well, talk to a little bit about your kind of professional background, how long you've been practicing, and how you got involved in handling divorce, child custody, and family law type cases.
Sure, I've been practicing law for about 18 years. Recently joined with the Crittenden Partners, had my own law firm for a while, and I've just always worked in the industry of divorce and family law.
Okay, and I guess representing both men and women.
Of course.
Of course, I've seen lately that there are people out there that are kind of marketing themselves towards one specific male or female over the other, but you're working on both sides, correct?
I've seen that, but we will take all of the clients that need representation.
Sure. Talk a little bit about how you see your role relative to talking with and consulting with people who may need to go through a divorce. And what I mean by that is, do you see yourself strictly as a lawyer where somebody comes in and says, hey, we want a divorce, or I want a divorce, what do I legally need to do? Or do you also function a little bit in the realm of counseling to see if you can help them reconcile the relationship?
Well, I think if you want to reconcile, you probably need to go about that with a counselor or something along those lines. I think our job is really to guide you through the legal process. You know, navigating the process can be very complicated. There's lots of, as you know, rules involved and certain things you can and cannot do. So really, as a divorce attorney, our job is to show people how to navigate through the court system and what you may or may not be entitled to in a divorce.
And I would think, has it been your experience that by the time somebody a spouse gets to the point of coming to see a lawyer, it's probably too late to reconcile. They're probably at a point to where they've convinced themselves, or the spouses are convinced that they need a divorce.
I think most of the time, if people have made an appointment with an attorney, they're ready to move forward.
Now, I've seen billboards out there advertising for uncontested divorce, $295 or something along those lines. Talk briefly about the difference between the uncontested divorce and the contested divorce and kind of the differences there.
Sure. If you and your spouse are able to reach an agreement about everything involved in your marriage, your assets, your debts, your property, your children, you can go to an attorney who will draw up paperwork to submit to the court seeking a divorce. So neither one of you will ever have to go to court, and that would be an uncontested divorce. A contested divorce is where you and your spouse really can't reach an agreement about things, and you both hire an attorney so that you can proceed with trying to either reach an agreement or ultimately going to trial with a judge.
Is it pretty rare in your judgment to have an uncontested divorce where small minor children are involved?
I couldn't say that it's rare. I think it depends on the personalities of the people involved, if they're willing to compromise and reach an agreement on things. Some people are just ready to part ways and understand it as more of a business transaction. And then there's different kinds of divorces where people just can't reach an agreement on things about their children or their assets or their debts.
Now, occasionally we'll hear about people being separated. Is separation, is that a legally recognized aspect or factor that can lead up to divorce, or is that just people saying, oh, we're physically separated?
I think that's where people are referring to the fact that they have physically separated, perhaps taken up different residences, and are moving towards a divorce.
All right, so talk briefly about how do you get a divorce started? So what is the initial steps that you do as a lawyer to start that process?
Well, you hire an attorney and they draft a divorce complaint, which is your request for a divorce that's submitted to the clerk of court where you live. And after it's initiated, they deliver it in some form or fashion to your spouse, and they have 30 days to respond to the clerk of court, and that's how you start a divorce.
And typically, are you paid on an hourly basis? Do you have an hourly rate that they would pay you by?
We do. We do get paid hourly.
Okay. And what courts handle divorces here in Alabama, and is it jury or non-jury?
Sure. The circuit court of the local counties handle the divorces, and it is always a non-jury.
Okay, so jury is just not an option.
It is just not an option.
Okay.
Let's step aside.
Okay.
You want to take our first break of the evening talking about these matters. We'll pick up more with Nicole and Carter as we head to break. A quick reminder of how you can keep up with all things going on at Hollis Wright, and that's on social media. So wherever you are on social media, Hollis Wright is there as well. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, even a YouTube page. So check them out there. A great informational, educational resource. Stay tuned. We've got more of the attorneys coming right up.
I'm Josh Wright with the law firm of Hollis Wright, a personal injury law firm, and thank you for watching The Attorneys. We hope you, a friend, or a loved one never needs legal counsel for a case. But if you do, the goal of the show is simple: to provide answers and legal counsel when you need it the most. Your call to the show is free and off air. So if you have questions specific to the show or related to other accident or injury topics, call, email, or text us. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, or go to hollis-wright.com and click on the Contact Us button. We know your time is valuable, so thank you for spending it with us and watching The Attorneys.
If you sustain an on-the-job injury, it can devastate you and your family. That's when you need the help of Hollis Wright. Our attorneys are right here in Birmingham and have decades of experience representing injured victims. We have handled on-the-job injury cases in every county throughout this great state and would be proud to help you. If you've been injured in an accident, always make Hollis Wright the first law firm you call. At Hollis Wright, results matter.
I started practicing law more than 20 years ago with a mission: advocate for personal injury victims in their darkest days. Recognizing that there were others who stood with me in that purpose, we built the Hollis Wright team from the ground up. Now with 25 employees here to help personal injury victims when they need it the most, our team is here for you. If you've been injured in an accident, always make Hollis Wright the first law firm you call. At Hollis Wright, results matter.
Welcome back into the Attorneys. We really appreciate you being with us each and every Sunday night. Don't forget, if you would like to take advantage of the opportunity to speak with attorneys from Hollis Wright, the number to know, 844-LAW-TALK, 844-529-8255, or locally, it's 205-324-3600. Back to our conversation here. A question we've got, what if my spouse does not want a divorce? What can I do?
Well, you can still proceed and get a divorce. Just because your spouse doesn't want a divorce doesn't mean you can't go to court and ask for a divorce, and ultimately you will get one.
Do you have to have some level of cooperation? I know in the cases that we handle, personal injury matters, we've got to file a complaint and we have to get the complaint served on the defendant. Do you have to go through a similar process where the spouse who may not want a divorce has to be served with papers, and do they have to respond and cooperate to some extent?
They do.
And what is the extent to which they have to cooperate? They can't. Can you get a default judgment type divorce? Oh, you can.
You can. If they don't file an answer within 30 days, your attorney can go and request a default judgment be entered against them.
So the whole premise of the movie Sweet Home Alabama is it's just thrown out the window.
I think so.
Right?
I think so.
You had to sign that.
You can't just force people to sign things.
There you go. All right. Now we know.
That's interesting. Well, I know that one of the probably first questions you would get from a potential client that comes to see you is they want to get an understanding of how the property or assets will be divided. Is there a formula that courts in Alabama have to use or typically will use to determine how the assets will be divided?
There really is not a formula. The judge will take into account everybody's circumstances and decide what the judge thinks is fair and equitable for everybody's different situation.
In your experience, because this is one of the questions that popped into my mind because I was really curious about it, in litigating divorce cases, do you find that oftentimes spouses are hiding assets or setting up accounts that perhaps the other spouse doesn't know about and putting cash in those accounts to try and sort of misappropriate funds, so to speak? Is that something that you commonly see?
Oh, absolutely. All the time people are trying to do that. I don't think that the internet and movies and things are very helpful in that sort of situation, teaching folks how to do these type of hiding.
Do you have any examples, or what are some of the more creative things that you've seen that people will try and do? Are they still stuffing stuff and cash in mattresses and things like that?
I haven't had anything like that happen in a while, but I think it's very typical for people to either try to hide cash somewhere, or give it to a family member, give it to a friend to hold on to, just, asking their employer to hold off on giving them a bonus, something like that, but it's still going to all come into play. I mean, if you got a bonus for the past 5 years, you're probably going to get a bonus again, and that's not something you can really hide. It's important to have a good attorney that's willing to search through things and uncover all of these hidings so you know what you're entitled to.
What is typically done, if there is a typical decision related to like retirement accounts, 401k, pensions, profit sharing and things like that? Because I know a lot of people that have jobs there have available to them pensions, but they can't get the money out of the pension until they retire. What typically is done about those situations?
That turns to be pretty complicated, depending on how long you were married, what you contributed to your retirement while you were married, if you're vested. There's just so many different things that go into that. Does your spouse have their own retirement? Part of resolving a divorce, at least for a judge, is kind of putting pieces of a puzzle together and deciding who contributed what, who spent what. Just lots that goes into it, lots of factors.
If the divorce case is not settled, obviously you go to a trial before the judge. What are some of the top issues that are typically before the judge? Do they typically involve just splitting up assets? Do they typically involve child custody issues, or is it pretty much all of the above?
All of the above. If you don't settle your case, of course you'd submit it to the judge to make a decision about all of these things.
Can you try cases based on what I call incomplete or partial issues? In other words, hey judge, we've resolved all of these issues except the child custody and visitation issue, and that's the issue we want you to address and decide?
It's happened rarely.
Okay.
Most of the time it's hard for people to settle one part and leave another part open to the government to decide what's going to happen with that item.
Talk a little bit about child support. So what are the factors and criteria that a judge is going to look at relative to child support, and are there any mandated requirements that a judge has to impose upon one spouse or another related to child support?
Well, child support is based off of your gross earnings, and there's a state mandated calculation according to each parent's percentage of the earnings. They also take into account if you have daycare costs and your health insurance cost, and it's broken down according to your percentage of your combined earnings.
Okay. What about, because I know this is a topic that comes up often, I think, in divorces when you're dealing with children, where one spouse wants to leave, say, Birmingham and move to Charlotte, North Carolina. And perhaps maybe it's the mom who has physical custody of the children. What are the restrictions and limitations imposed upon a spouse in those situations?
Sure, we have a Relocation Act here in Alabama that dictates what you can and cannot do about moving. You have to send your spouse or ex-spouse a certified letter letting them know about your intentions, and if they disagree with those, they can challenge you in court, and it's ultimately left up to a judge whether or not you can relocate with the children.
Are there any presumptions in place, like a presumption that it's typically not in the best interest of the children to move with the spouse? Do they have anything like that?
I can't say that there's an automatic presumption in place about that. I think it's just going to depend on, the person's reason for moving. Are they moving to better a job? Are they moving where they have family? Really comes down to why do they want to make this move?
It might also depend on the ages of the children as well.
Sure. I mean, just trying to move away from your ex-spouse or your spouse is not usually gonna get
not
you
gonna
the
fly.
move.
I just want to get away from
No.
it. That's not a legitimate
No.
excuse.
Before we head to break, a question here. Can a judge order a parent to pay for college?
A judge can no longer order a parent to pay for college.
Did they used to be able to?
They used to be able to.
And that law, I think, did change within the last several years.
It changed within the last several years.
All right, so let's head to our final break of the evening. Just a few minutes remaining in the show. If you want to give the attorneys a call from Hollis, Wright, you got a few minutes to do so. Stay tuned. We've got the final segment of the attorneys coming right up.
I'm Josh Wright with the law firm of Hollis, Wright. In court, attorneys are not allowed to tell juries certain things. For example, we cannot talk about a defendant's net worth, meaning the defendant's ability, resources, or insurance to pay a verdict. In this week's Legal 4-in-1, we're answering the question, why can't lawyers talk about a defendant's net worth to a jury? Now, Rule 403 of the Alabama Rules of Evidence states, in part, relevant evidence may be excluded if its probative value is substantially outweighed by the danger of unfair prejudice. Long-standing Alabama cases have held that the net worth of the defendant falls under this catch-all rule and is to be excluded. The reasoning behind the rule is that if a jury knows a defendant is wealthy, then the jury might award more money to the plaintiff. And this goes one step further. If an attorney makes any remarks that suggest the defendant is responsible because he is wealthy or rich and the plaintiff is poor, that can be grounds for a new trial. If you're ever on a jury, the reality in our state is this. In almost every lawsuit that goes to trial, the attorneys representing both the plaintiff and the defendant have already looked at whether there's sufficient insurance coverage or assets to satisfy a verdict. Most likely, the parties would not pursue a civil lawsuit if damages could not be paid after a jury returns a verdict. So even though lawyers cannot mention the net worth of the defendant during trial, there likely are resources available to pay a verdict in court. Please remember, your call, email, or text to the attorneys is free. All of us at Hollis Wright want to help answer your questions on real issues you face. And remember, a competent lawyer will respond to every question you send in. That's our pledge and promise to you. And as always, thanks for watching The Attorneys right here on WVTN 13.
Welcome back into the Attorneys Hour final segment. So just 8 minutes remaining. If you want to speak with the attorneys from Hollis, Wright, who are standing by live, the number 844-LAW-TALK, 844-529-8255, or locally in the Birmingham area, the number 205-324-3600. Carter?
Yeah, I know, Nicole, in our practice, one of the discovery activities that we like to engage in when we're trying to develop our case is to issue a subpoena to the cell phone company, maybe Verizon or AT&T, to try and get cell phone records, and that's particularly important in cases where we suspect there might be distracted driving from texting and driving or talking on a cell phone. Of course, I could also see how that might be important in a divorce proceeding if somebody is suspected that their spouse is cheating on them and they want to find out who they're calling and when they're calling. Is that something that you all would typically do, is try and issue a subpoena to get cell phone records?
Yes, that's very typical to try to get them, and you're right, to get the call logs about what number they were dialing, who people have been communicating with.
Now, can you actually get the text messages if they're text messages between people or contents of the phone conversation?
I wish we could. I think a lot of people wish they could, but we just know they won't. I don't even know if they have it, but they won't give that to attorneys for a subpoena. You're just going to get the call log about who's calling who, and really, if you have access to that phone, if you're on a family plan, you can probably pull it up yourself.
Yeah, maybe so. One of the reasons I asked about separation and whether that was legally recognized in family law as part of the divorce process is I know oftentimes these divorce proceedings can take quite some time, I think maybe a year to a couple of years, if not longer, depending upon various issues. What do you recommend or advice do you give to your clients about dating during the divorce proceedings? Is that absolutely taboo? And how might that impact the divorce proceeding?
Well, you're still married until the judge signs off on your order saying you're no longer married, so it's not looked favorably upon dating. I mean, I would have to advise all of my clients not to do it. Now,
what is your impression of how judges might perceive dating in a given situation? Are some judges more forgiving about that depending upon the circumstances than others, or are a lot of judges still out there really holding that against people?
I think a lot of judges are still pretty much holding firm on their decision on, you're still married, you're going through a divorce, and, look unfavorably upon inviting another person into your life at that point.
And that obviously could negatively impact that spouse related to child support issues, child custody issue, visitation, those types of things.
Right, it would impact your whole divorce.
Yeah.
This is a complicated matter and some complicated issues. Legal help is certainly helpful for sure to navigate these waters. Question we've got here, though, is what if I cannot afford an attorney? What advice do you give to those folks in that boat?
Well, it's not like criminal court. You do not get appointed an attorney that the government pays for. So your options are probably to try the Volunteer Lawyers Association, see if you qualify for some legal aid. Or try your best to reach a settlement with your spouse.
Or maybe ask a friend to loan you some money and maybe help you along that process.
Right, and a lot of firms take credit cards, so you can always put it on a credit card or try that aspect.
I know this may be a softball question to a divorce attorney, but have you seen, though, in terms of the results of someone not having an attorney and trying to figure it out themselves versus having an attorney to help them with it? Is there any statistical evidence of the differences in results?
I couldn't quote a statistical set of circumstances, but I don't see how somebody without legal knowledge could navigate the legal field. I think it would be similar to, are you going to try to do a medical procedure on yourself? Or, are you going to try to get involved in a really complicated tax matter on your own? I just don't know how a lay person can navigate the court system. And the clerk's office is not allowed to give legal advice. So there's really nowhere for you to go and just pick up on things.
Right.
Do you find that the financial side of getting a divorce where both spouses lawyer up, hire their own lawyers, the fact that it can be time consuming and it can be expensive, does that help oftentimes the spouses who are otherwise kind of intransigent and don't want to compromise? Does it kind of help them sometimes come together and say, look, let's resolve this? All the money we're trying to split up, is half of it's going to be gone by the time we get through this process.
Sure, I think some people take like a cost-benefit approach to a divorce and decide, how much more money do I want to put towards my argument? Are there some compromises I can make? But a lot of people that are in a divorce are just unwilling to compromise.
It's a very bitter and emotional process,
It is.
I imagine. Talk a little bit about common law marriage. Does Alabama still recognize common law marriage? My understanding is maybe 2 or 3 years ago, there was a statute that was passed where we no longer recognize common law marriages. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And
no longer.
No longer. So, but how about people that have held themselves out for 20 or 30 years as being common law married? Can they still be considered married from a common law standpoint?
I would say if they considered themselves common law married before the new law went into effect, they would still be honored.
Okay. Tell me about situations where you've got somebody who has children out of wedlock, so they're not married. Are those types of situations, is one spouse, not spouse because they're not married, but is one person eligible for like child support, and is the non-custodial person allowed visitation? How does that work outside the context of being married?
Sure, there's a process for that too, for unwed parents to go through establishing paternity. Perhaps you need a court-issued DNA test to make it formal, and then the same sort of rules about calculating child support apply, and at that point, rather than dividing assets and debts, you would just be seeking a custodial arrangement for your child. Okay, so as it relates to child support and those types of subjects, kind of the same rules apply, you're just not dealing with a divorce. Right.
We have right at a minute remaining, just time enough for a quick final thought. And Nicole, if you would, you go first real quick.
I would just say to anybody that wants to consider a divorce, get your stuff organized, be very aware of what's going on in your family and your household. Go seek a competent attorney to guide you through the matter.
Yeah, it can be a very emotional and bitter process. Thankfully, I've not had to go through that process before. 20 years happily married. Hopefully, I never have to do that. But I do have family and friends that have gone through that process, and it can be very emotional and very personal. I think cooler heads prevailing is always the best route to take, and try and work with a good, competent, qualified attorney like Nicole to help you through the process.
Having someone like Nicole on your side would certainly help, for sure. Well, Nicole, Carter, thanks to both of you.
Thank you,
I
David.
appreciate it. Thanks for being with us tonight. Grateful for them being here and you being here as well. We always are very grateful for the time you give us each and every Sunday evening. Thanks so much for the time. We'll look for you next time right here on The Attorneys. Have a great week, everybody.
Thanks for watching The Attorneys, sponsored by Hollis Wright.